Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge and celebrate the First Nations people on whose traditional lands we meet and work. I would specifically like to acknowledge the Bidjigal people that are the traditional custodians of the land on which the UNSW Kensington campus stands. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders both past and present and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present here today. So I'm Kira Smith. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the Social Policy Research Centre. And today we're delighted to have Dr. Megan Rose and Professor Deborah Lupton, who will be presenting on autism supports for comfort, care and connection. Megan Rose is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Vitalities Lab at the University of New South Wales, Sydney, Australia, and the Australian Research Council Centre for Excellence for Automated Decision-Making in Society. She's a cultural sociologist and artist interested in how creativity is used in new technologies and collective cultures for care, safety, and belonging. Her latest research explores the significance of self-determined cultures, communities, and supports for autistic adults, as well as the cultural impact of care robot design. Deborah Lupton is Sharp Professor in the Faculty of Arts, Design and Architecture at the University of New South Wales, Sydney. Her research is interdisciplinary, spanning sociology, media, and cultural studies. She is located in the Centre for Social Research and Health and the Social Policy Research Centre, leading both the Vitalities Lab and the UNSW node of the Australian Research Council's Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision-Making in Society. Whew, got that all out. Our presenters will speak for around 40 to 45 minutes, and this will be followed by a Q&A at the end of the presentation. You're welcome to submit any questions you have via the chat function, and we can go through them in the Q&A session after the presentation. And if you could all just please mute yourselves, that would help the audio. And also please note that Zoom has an auto captions function that you can turn on by clicking on the CC button towards the right-hand side at the bottom of the screen. So thank you. Over to our presenters.
Thank you, Kira. Great to be here and to be talking about our fabulous project. I'm going to start off the presentation, and then I'm going to hand over to Meg, and she's going to finish off, and then, yes, we'll be interested to hear any comments and questions that people might have. So, the project background. So, Meg and I are the project team. We are, luckily enough, we have got funding from the Vitalities Lab through my UNSW Sharp appointment, but also from the ARC Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision-Making and Society. I'm a chief investigator in that Centre of Excellence. Meg is funded to do postdoctoral work with me as part of that funding. And what we think makes this project particularly distinctive is that it is autistic-led and accessibility-led and a strengths-based approach. So when Meg and I were discussing what we wanted to study in relation to both the digital and non-digital, non-human supports. So we're very interested in not so much how other people contribute to autistic people's supports and comfort, care and connection. We really wanted to focus on things, places, spaces, objects, and how they contributed to how people can basically get through their everyday lives and find comfort, care and connection. So we call this both a more than human and more than digital approach, because we're interested in how people use digital devices, but also how they use things that aren't digital. Acknowledging, of course, that when people are using digital devices, whether it's phones, wearable devices, laptops, desktop computers, apps, platforms, social media, sites, they're always doing it in a more than digital environment. They're always in an environment with potentially other people, with other living things, other creatures. They're in a certain built place and space, or they might sometimes be in the natural environment. So any use of a digital device for any person or for any human, is always a more than digital use as part of a sort of ecosystem of digital and non-digital things. So Meg identifies as an autistic woman, and I really relied on Meg's advice in sort of, as we planned this project, as we were developing our ethics application. I don't identify as an autistic person. I identify as neurotypical, but I do have lived experience. I have a close family member who I've supported, who's now an adult, a late diagnosed autistic person. So I sort of have a long experience of helping and supporting and being part of that person's life. So I do have that lived experience. And so together, Meg and I really wanted to make sure that this project was going to be as accessible as possible to the autistic people that we wanted to invite to be involved to talk about their supports. And so when we were writing the ethics application, we talked a lot between ourselves, Meg and I, about just how we could make sure that our participants would feel comfortable, would feel safe, would feel included, that there were various ways for them to be involved. If they preferred to answer our questions using written text, for example, we were happy for that to be the approach that they engaged with us using. If they'd rather just speak to us and answer our questions that way, we offered that. So we offered various ways for people just to make them feel included and make the project as accessible as possible. And we were also super wanting to make sure that our research findings would reach the autistic community. So we have a huge emphasis on community research, translation and engagement. And you're going to hear a bit more later about how we've tried to do that already. And also just to think of engaging ways for this particular community that they would see themselves, I guess, that people beyond our participants would be able to recognise themselves, feel as if there's like-minded people, that they're not alone in this world, that other people engage in the kinds of supports that they might prefer. And that's really that strengths-based approach, as well as acknowledging, of course, that autistic people face many challenges in an ableist world. So those are all the things that we sort of had swirling around our heads when we were designing this project. And also, of course, when we came to talk to our participants, design our research translation activities. And we're now working on writing academic articles as well. So we'll be doing all of those things. So we were able to recruit 12 people living in Australia. We were very careful as well as part of our recruitment methods to say to people, whether if you identify as autistic, whether have an expert diagnosis or you're self-diagnosed, or you're even questioning that you might be autistic, we are open to any kind of sort of identification as autistic. We recruited our participants through several ways, but one was involving community organisations, reaching out to their members and telling them about our study. We used autistic-related hashtags on very selective and targeted social media. And also word of mouth. It's a bit of sort of, do you know anyone else who might be interested in being involved, that we used. We did have quite a few problems. I mean, we didn't have any sort of, we only asked people 18 and over who identify as autistic, that were our only, and living in Australia. That was our only sort of selection criteria. We were happy to be inclusive of any kind of gender, sexuality, ethnicity, cultural heritage and so on, but we did have a lot of trouble finding people who identified as male to be involved. So in the end, we only had one cis man who was involved. But in a way, we were quite sort of not too worried about that, because we're also highly aware that it's particularly late diagnosed women or non-binary people are often those who are left out of this typical sort of archetype of the autistic person. And it's only really been quite recently that it's been acknowledged that women and girls and non-binary people can also be autistic and have been offered or confined diagnoses. So in a way, it was quite good that we were able to focus on people other than autistic men, but it was great that we had at least one man involved. We did have a bit of a range of ethnic and cultural backgrounds, and all of our participants in the end were late diagnosed adults, and they were at various stages of burnout. So some people we talked to had gone through some really bad times, particularly at work in recent times when their needs weren't being included, when they were finding life pretty inaccessible for them, particularly in the workplace. Others, not so much, but a bit of a range there. And we decided to do all the interviews online again, unless people wanted to do it by text, but it was all through a virtual. There was no face-to-face interactions. Again, for accessibility, what it meant was that we could talk to people at different parts of Australia, not just people who live near us in Sydney. Who lived in rural regions, for example. Often, the people who live in rural and remote communities, it doesn't matter what the topic of research is, often get excluded because it can be difficult to do face-to-face research with them. But again, by offering online ways of engaging, it meant we could include people from rural and remote regions as well as metropolitan regions. And we decided to take a case study strategy, basically drawing on the people's responses to our questions, and for each person writing a case study, which we think is a really great way to really get at the sort of biographical details of people's lives and their current situation and how they're incorporating the supports into their lives at the time of the interview. So, research questions. These are the research questions we were focusing on in our project. We were interested in what makes autistic people feel connected to the world. We were also really interested in what are the positive dimensions of stimming. Now, stimming is a term used by autistic people to talk about how they engage in sort of self-stimulation practices, multisensory practices, ways of calming themselves, finding comfort, being able to focus or just decompress after a difficult time. We find in the literature on autistic practices of stimming, there's obviously often a very sort of pathological representation that stimming is kind of unusual or something that should be quelled or managed or masked. We wanted to, in our research, say, well, for many autistic people, stimming is vital to their well-being and their health and just getting through life. So we really wanted to focus on how people use stimming in positive ways. We were also interested in how do autistic people engage in self-care in an often hostile and prejudiced environment where they are dealt with ableist perspectives, they are marginalised, their needs aren't accepted or are stigmatised in many cases as well, and they feel that they can't openly express their need for stimming and for other supports. We were interested in how they deal creatively with sensory overload, dysregulation, exclusion and distress, and how they find calm, comfort and happiness. We were interested, and finally, our final question was, we were interested in what supports would they design for themselves to best suit their needs. So we had a question at the end about that. And we were really interested in the ideas that people came up with. So I'm now going to hand over to Meg. Meg was the person who did all the interviews and all the sort of engagement with our participants. And I should just mention, as you can see here, you will be able to see very, very soon that the wonderful illustrations that we asked autistic graphic artist Sarah Firth to develop for our research findings, part of our research translation engagement. Before I ask Meg to talk about some examples, we're not going to talk about every single one of our 12 participants, but before I ask Meg to go on and talk about some of them, just mentioning that the way we talked to Sarah about developing what we call the portraits of our participants is we did so in a way that we wanted to preserve our participants' anonymity. So we gave every participant a pseudonym, but also when we asked Sarah to draw illustrations, we provided her with our interview transcripts, but she had no idea what people looked like. She didn't hear their voices. She only had the written interview transcripts and could read what they said about their supports in response to our questions. And we said to her, we actually don't want the illustrations to look like our participants because we want to preserve their anonymity. So she just used her imagination to configure the portraits based on just basically what she read in the transcripts. So she was able to really well encapsulate what they talked about, what they said about their challenges and how they use supports to deal with the challenges of being an autistic person, as you'll see in a minute, but in a way that didn't show people what people exactly look like. So she didn't even know their age. She didn't know where they lived. She didn't know what they did for work unless they mentioned it in their interviews. So you'll be able to see some of those in a minute. And yes, I'll now pass over to Meg to talk about some of the case studies we wrote from our findings. Thanks, Meg.
Deborah, thank you. Yes, so thank you so much, everyone, for coming. My name's Meg. I'm an autistic person, and I'm very proud to be working with Deborah on this project and to give the autistic community a chance to share their experiences and voices in a research climate where the majority of studies are not community-led or community consulted. Which I'm happy to answer a bit more about during question time. But in particular, that's what makes this project special. We're moving away from deficit-based language in talking about autistic people's lives and experiences, and have tried to put together a series of case studies for autistic people that are affirmative in their identity. And I think it was also really special to connect with these 12 different autistic people and for them to let me into their lives and to share such precious information to them. So supports and special interests and so on for autistic people is very special and it's very precious. And I think it was really touching and moving for them to share these things with you so openly, in addition to their struggles that they were experiencing at the time of the interview. Yeah, so as you can see here, we have an illustration by Sarah Firth, accompanied by some text. This is an extract from the report that we're launching today, which we'll be sharing in the chat as well if you'd like to go open the document and have a look. So Rochelle is an Indigenous trans woman who is late diagnosed and has undergone a very beautiful journey of transition throughout their life. So they're in the mid-stage of their life. And as you can see in this illustration, Sarah's organised Rochelle's special supports and interests into supports that help, special interests that fill me up, and challenges that I face. And one of the key supports for Rochelle was her assemblage or collecting of objects. And Rochelle's favourite object is a red vase, which she feels she has a special friendship and relationship with. And it's about not just the object itself, but its sensory qualities, its textures, its iridescence. There's a variety of colours on the red vase that she really likes to stim with and connect with. And in addition to this, Rochelle identifies as a very proud queer maximalist and lives a very beautiful, colourful life with a range of beautiful garments that she's been able to collect and wear with pride in transitioning, and also through beautiful plants and flowers and other kinds of happy femme things. And for Rochelle, these sort of objects form a kind of more than human or non-human relationship, which many autistic people feel special connections to the objects that they have in their lives, whether it is a red vase or whether it's a pillow or a comforting blanket, and so on and so forth. And so when these things break, Rochelle feels quite connected and sad for this object because of those memories that are kind of embedded into it and the comfort that it offered her in her life at that time. And at the same time, challenge is often organizing these things and keeping her space clear and compact. And I think if anybody else here in the audience is also ADHD, autistic, that might be something that could be relatable in terms of doom piles and other kinds of words that we have for this kind of experience. In addition to that, Rochelle also loves social media, uses a lot of digital tools, in particular YouTube, to look up her really interesting clock repair, clock making, crochet, knitting, and more. But also TikTok and connecting with others, and also using social media like Instagram to connect with other people with similar experiences to her. Although she did report experiencing some online bullying and trolling, as many trans people experience online in this current climate. In addition to that, she also loves to craft and she loves to read and the tactility of objects. And all of these supports sort of help her navigate exhaustion, social misunderstandings for multiple intersections of disadvantage that she experiences, as well as sensory overload. But at the same time, these supports help her navigate and find connection and comfort with others, and as well as the more than human. So if Rochelle could design her own support, and this is a question that we asked all 12 participants, she would make an app that helps her collect and find beautiful things for her apartment. So she's often on all kinds of cataloging websites, like, eBay or e-commerce websites, as well as the various marketplace apps that are out there. But she would love something that would help her create and find beautiful garments and textiles and all things happy and femme. Next slide, please. So our next person is Ali. So Ali is in the mid-stage of her life and is a mum. And she loves a wide variety of things. As you can see, this illustration is quite a little bit more dense. And that's because of the rich intersection she has with placemaking, digital media, television media, apps, and more. And we were really interested to hear about Ali's experiences of making a rich assemblage of these different things using apps and software. So, for example, we can see in the supports that help. She really enjoys comfort movies, watching movies on repeat. In particular, Disney was a very big theme. We had a big discussion about Disney adults. For the record, she's not too worried about what's said about Disney adults. But she very much enjoys engaging with that kind of media with others through social media and forums, talking through the different layers. So, for example, is Queen Elsa from Frozen autistic coded, queer coded, feminism, The Little Mermaid, and this kind of thing. And this is a very common thing for many autistic people with an interest in media to do, to analyze media deeply and to think deeply and philosophically about the things that they love. And Ali described this as thinking in layers, and I thought that that was a very beautiful way of putting it. As someone who also has a background in fan studies, in particular anime studies, we often talk about straddling layers, thinking about layers, embodying text in interesting ways that autistic people do kind of gravitate to. So in addition to this media interest, she also enjoys apps like Hole and Fill, sort of pattern-based stimming games that she allows herself to have a go at after decompressing from things like a stressful meeting at work, that fills her back up and gives her energy. In addition to this, she also uses things like spreadsheets to organize her special interest in Japan and travel. So her dream trip is to go to Japan, so she would coordinate and catalog all the different places she'd like to go as she finds them. And during a period of difficult burnout, this was what saved her, was actually sitting there and methodically going through. There's a rhythm and a pattern making to building these information things. And I feel that many autistic people globally contribute to our information hubs on places like the internet, if not also in their own households and homes. Yes, so I think just moving on to her own recommended support, she would love to make a guidebook co-written by autistic people with tips and tricks based on, lived experience, solutions to problems that autistic people face. But she prefer it to not be hosted on social media, in partly because moderation will be difficult with online bullying, but also with misinformation online from particular groups with an interest in framing autism in a particular way. Next slide, please. Next, we have Jessica. So Jessica is a young woman who is also a mother and is a happy dopamine dresser as an ADHD autistic person. So dopamine dressing means collecting and wearing bright, happy, colorful things that fill you with joy. So I'm sure for those of you who live around Sydney and Melbourne in particular, you've seen very happily, colorfully dressed dopamine dressers throughout the city. And of course, on social media and online, this is a very important viral part of autistic ADHD social media networking. And Jessica has a range of special interests, but in particular, anime, comics, and also games you can play on your phone called visual novels, which are basically like choose your own adventure kind of, but they're based on like romances or relationships, as well as gacha games, which are kind of games where you collect cards and other kinds of objects through battles to progress a story. So very much the appeal of these characters in these sorts of games is their aesthetic design, which Jessica is very intensely drawn to the point that she's a talented artist, beautiful artist. She showed me some of her drawings and she made her own tattoos. She drew her own tattoos. She has beautiful nails with characters on it. And she very much enjoys kind of romance stories in particular as someone who identifies as asexual. And that is part of the LGBTQIA alphabet. And it means someone who has limited to no sexual desire or interest. It was actually International Asexuality Day 2 days ago, I believe. So happy Asexuality Day to those of you in the audience. So in addition to this kind of media, she really enjoyed noise cancelling headphones, which is a very common support to cover her ears, whether it's an in-ear or over-ear support, that allows her to block out noise that causes distress. As well as sensory items. So of course the nails, the long nails and the clucking of the nails is quite pleasurable, like touching glass and so on, but also tactile objects like silk blankets, warm, thick cardigans, these sorts of things. So very much her dopamine dressing is in part a response to color and aesthetics, but also textural and sensory things like warmth and coolness as well. In particular for Jessica, she finds working from home very, very important, and she would really like people to understand that working from home is one of the best supports you can give autistic people because you can control the sensory environment. Bright lights, fluorescent lights, and things like background noise or even the wrong temperature can be very dysregulating for most people, but in particular for autistic people who are very sensitive and also experience the world in ways that I think neurotypical people might not be able to understand quite easily because we have different wiring and different experiences. And so for Jessica, she found that the most important support for her was workplace policies that support and protect and provide cultural safety for autistic people. So working from home, the need to stim or to move or to even just wear headphones in the workplace or to have a quiet meeting room to go and sit in and work was vital. So I feel like these things actually benefit everybody, and advocates like Chloe Hayden in particular speak quite openly about how important it is for if we accommodate autistic people, we're actually accommodating and helping everybody. You know, a little bit like a canary in a cage. If an autistic person is saying it's very bright, I'm sure neurotypical people will also notice just a little bit later down the track, just speaking from experience. Next slide, please. Thank you. So next we have Ren. So Ren is a non-binary person, and Ren has just moved out of home with their cat, sorry. And their cat Celeste is a very important companion and support, and this was a very popular and common support that was listed, was specifically cats. And this, I think, is part of the sociality of cats. A lot of people say that cats are very autistic adjacent, but also I think in terms of unconditional love and support that those cats offer without creating complex, without having complex social needs or means of speaking or communicating that can be at times a little bit unclear for autistic people. If a cat likes you, it likes you. If it doesn't like you, it doesn't like you. Hopefully your cat likes you. So in particular, Celeste was a very important companion. So Ren didn't feel alone living in their new apartment and sort of moving away from the structure that family provided. But also living away from home gave her a sense of control of environment. So, for example, being able to have a dishwasher, a weighted blanket, her favorite little character plush toy, so Pikachu plush toy, and also literally having the walls and the door to be able to keep people and environment out until she could decompress, and then open the door to invite her friends over for a movie night or something like this. In particular, they also really enjoy going through things like real estate websites. So this is an interesting special interest in floor plans. And this started when Ren was very young, when they were given a floor plan magazine when their parents were buying a house. And ever since, Ren has really enjoyed immersing themselves in mapping out how the plan would look in real life. And I just found that absolutely fascinating. And of course, as we know, many autistic people have really rich and diverse special interests. And it's not just about looking at things, it's about thinking about and engaging in interesting ways and creative ways with these things. And of course, also I should mention The Sims. Now this is a very important support to mention for people who are women or non-binary or in that kind of alignment of gendered expression. In particular, it's often missed, particularly with young women little girls who are playing The Sims as a special interest. Now, this in part is due to the accessibility of this game, where you basically create houses, families, and lives of little playable characters, and they get a job, and they meet each other, and they start their own families. So it's like vicariously playing through the life of another person. But there's also a sociality to these games, and a kind of pleasure in kind of engaging with and creating stories and life cycles and sociality through things like avatars, but not just avatars in games, also things like dolls or even animals. For example, like chickens. For example, chicken keeping is a very common interest for autistic people in rural areas, in the social life and sociality of those chickens. So what I find really interesting about autistic people's engagement and special interests is their own sociality that plays out. That's often missed. And in particular, for people who were little girls, I think things like The Sims is often missed, or dolls is often missed, which is relevant to a range of case studies across the booklet that's not here today. So Ren is a non-binary person. If they could make their own support, they would make a tactile cushion that they could carry in their bag and touch when they need to calm down. So just the size of a small square, so it's discreet. And this would be kind of squishy and covered with soft fur, but also embroidered designs for different textural input, but also not a bit too big or a bit too surprising to cause people to ask lots of questions. Though Ren said quite proudly at this point, they would be comfortable telling people to not ask too many questions or to mind their own business, but also to perhaps explain or educate others. And I think sometimes the visibility of these supports is something that comes up quite a bit with people sort of make unkind comments about the supports that autistic people use and find it for themselves that works for them. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have Beatrice. I believe this is the last one. So Beatrice, I just want to point out, is a younger woman, even though we have a picture of an older woman. The reason this happened, as Deborah mentioned, is because Sarah didn't see the participants nor hear their voice, but also I think Sarah was really keen to show the diversity in the autistic community and to really emphasize that stereotypes, particularly in the media, as well as other kinds of news reportage, and of course in research and science, has really highlighted a certain group of autistic people, but not other types. And in particular, in my own work, in addition to this project, but separate to this, I meet a lot of older women who don't realize that they're autistic, and that so they're coming into their own late stage of realization and diagnosis in the later part of life. And this is because at the time when they were children, there wasn't a belief that women or girls could not be autistic and that it was a boy thing. And as a result, you know, they've gone through various stages of burnout, a disadvantage, all kinds of psychological impacts, particularly with misdiagnosis about what it is they were experiencing. For example, borderline personality disorder is a common attribution made. And I just want to point out that the community who is linked to that particular diagnosis has their own perspectives and views on that. And I'm not commenting on that today, but also other things like depression and anxiety, in particular social anxiety. So that's why there's an older person, but Beatrice is actually a mature age student, so a bit younger. And Beatrice loves to connect with nature. So Beatrice has moved across the world a couple of times and now is back in Australia. And their great love right now is native gardening. And this includes a small planter box full of native plants and edible plants. That's got its own rich ecology of insect life. So in particular, she's befriended lady beetles, which I thought was really charming. There was a lady beetle that she was able to rescue and connect with and form a kind of little relationship with before returning it to nature. But also, as part of her moving across different properties and places, she's had bumblebee colonies, butterflies, and also she's come to like spiders, even though they're a little bit scary at times, but also experience sensory challenges like slimy slugs and snails. But being able to nurture things and to be able to come and connect with plant life, and also not just understand what their names are and the different types of plant life, but also how they work, how they grow, and to watch something flourish, I think was a really important part of Beatrice's experience. And this sort of translates across to lots of different things that Beatrice does, in particular crafting and knitting was a big one, as well as engaging with different kinds of sustainability practices as well. You know, Beatrice has a really big heart and was really connected to others and to nature, and it was really touching to hear Beatrice's story. So that's just a quick touch on some of the stories inside our booklet that we're launching today. We have 12 of these different cases, and the case studies themselves that I wrote up were like 3 or 4 pages. So we've really just given you a summary of some of the top level supports that were interesting and try to create a bit of diversity across the different types of supports. Next slide. But there were some key themes. Next slide. So there were some common supports I just want to really highlight for those who would like the take-home message. So organizational software was really important, and this includes calendars, Excel, Word documents, Google documents, right down to apps on your phone that organize your files. So for example, Dropbox, having Dropbox and be able to move files around, or Drive was really important. Social media was significant for everybody because it allowed people to connect with others on their terms, think carefully about what they'd like to say before they say it, or engage socially with people without a pressure to respond or worry about what their face is doing, or what we call masking, which is to give certain expressions or reactions that appear to be neurotypical, but are actually really exhausting to maintain. So social media had its own sociality to it that I think further research could really expand on to understand better. And as I've said previously, I think that a lot of content creators are actually also autistic, ADHD, and other kinds of neurodiverse, whether they're not open about it or not. And I think that they actually contribute in a major way to internet cultures and life. And I think more could be done to recognize and support those people for what they've done for the globe and what they've done for the community. Mobile and computer games were very important. So a lot of these games were either sensory, like hole and fill, pattern making, watching the patterns and stimming to that, but also rich forms of storytelling. As you know, I just want to add to that also, tabletop role play games were really popular as well as a way of kind of creating your own stories collaboratively with others, and to also create alternative lives and ways of being, which I thought was quite touching. Soft textures were really important. So soft blankets, soft pillows, plush toys were big. Squishmallows were the autistic mascot I felt for this project, Squishmallows, which are very, very squishy and soft, round animal toys that you might find in a lot of department stores in Australia. And these are very popular with young teenage women, and of course, boys as well. But they're very, very popular with autistic people because they're very pliable and they're also very round shaped and very kind of comforting to hold. So that's just the current trend, but I'm sure there'll be another plush toy that's popular. Colourful objects and clothing were really significant. As I mentioned, dopamine dressing was really important, but even people might have a favourite colour that they really loved. And I think particularly for people who are gender diverse, there's a really complex intersection of colourful objects and clothing as a form of gendered expression, which scholars like Nick Walker explore through ideas like neuroqueer for people who are both queer and neurodivergent. Fidget toys were very popular. In particular, some commentary was given that perhaps fidget toys for adults could also be made. There was feeling that some of the toys were a bit limited for younger demographic, particularly children. So perhaps more in that department. Weighted blankets was significant. I'm just going to go a bit quicker. Collections of special interests we've mentioned already. Headphones and earplugs, very, very significant to be able to play music so you can control the input, the sound and the input, or as well as earplugs to block out sound. So that's really significant. Cats we've mentioned, handcrafts we've mentioned, reading and creative writing, very, very significant, particularly reading on paper, the tactility of paper. Working from home, I've mentioned, and workplace accommodations, I've mentioned. So as you can see, there's a really rich list of supports that are both tangible, like objects, as well as digital, like software and so on. But also, both of these things are linked to the imagination and sociality in a new, or not a new kind of way, but in a way that is very meaningful and important to neurodiverse people. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, I think a big part of this is feeling at home and being creative and improvising. So some of these supports I've listed are specially designed, usually specially designed for neurodiverse people, like weighted blankets, for example, or fidget toys. But also I think a lot of these were impromptu and found, like, for example, Rochelle's red vase. That comes from a moment of encounter of finding this vase and being so struck by it that a kind of relationship forms with the vase and the person, as well as intuitively picking up different forms of media or encountering an animal. I think a lot of these supports are not necessarily designed for neurotypical people, but a lot of agency is expressed in being able to find and choose these things. And also this comes out of a sense of necessity because there isn't a lot of supports for autistic adults that are specially made at this point in time. Although there's some sort of small startup companies that are working in this area. I think that a lot more could be done to help autistic adults with specialized supports, but also to not take the agency away from them in being able to choose what works for them. And I think that was a very big take-home message. People really wanted the power to choose and to not be infantilized and told what they need and what they do. They're in control of their lives. They know what they need. They'd love help and advice and tips, but they're in charge. Yeah, as I mentioned, technology really played an important role for calibrating environments. One person mentioned smart globes being really helpful because they could actually impact the percentage of how bright the light was. Bright lights and big sounds are like two of the major stresses in this contemporary modern environment that really impact neurodiverse people. And I think this is why gardening was such an appeal, being out in nature and being outside in sunlight. In particular, stimming was very transformative. I thought it was very beautiful, growing a beautiful garden or knitting a beautiful scarf. There was a kind of rhythm and self-expression and externalization back out into the world that we see as part of stimming that I think a lot of people don't recognize. They think of stimming as a repetitive movement, for example, moving your hand like this or playing with a pencil like this. But I think a lot of autistic people's expression is very externalizing and pushing out into the world. When you have too much input, sensory input, the response is to output, whether it's movement, it could even be dance, but it could also be writing, it could also be painting, it could also be gardening or nurturing other people. All kinds of things can be stimming. So in this way, we call stimming to be a form of creative, imaginative, and improvised response to the world. And this is significant because a lot of research at this point still has deficit-based language when talking about autistic people's responses, and they attempt to stop people from stimming, basically, which for those who are not autistic in the room, you should never do. That's very, very harmful, and it can actually have negative impacts. In particular, with the women we spoke with who had their stimming stopped, some of them were at major points of burnout in their life because people had tried to control their joyful expression that wasn't hurting other people. It just looked a little bit different. It just looked colourful and different. Next slide. So that's a summary of our report, which has been dropped in the chat. If you'd like to watch a linked project output, which is a documentary with 3 autistic people, there's a QR code on the screen where they've brought in some of their supports to actually talk about, along with their experiences as well, and that's just up on YouTube. I really hope that you enjoy sort of hearing from these 3 people and what they have to say, and it's also a bit more accessible because it's short if you want to share it with people along with this report. It also has diverse ways of representing information as well. So I'm very big on universal design for learning, which is like multiple means of representation of information as well. Next slide. Yes, and so here's the QR code to our report. So if you'd like to download the report, it's available on APO. It's for free. It's written in lay language with these beautiful illustrations by Sarah Firth and some text by Deborah and myself. And I just encourage you to share it widely. And it's really just there for the community in a way that we felt was accessible. So yes, I think that's everything. Thank you so much for listening to the stories of 6 people. I hope you enjoy hearing from the other 6 people in the report.
Thank you so much. That was a really interesting presentation, and we've had quite a few comments and questions in the chat. But just to flag for people too that this is being recorded, so if you wish to ask a question directly, yeah, just to be aware of that, or you can keep your camera off, or you can put a question in the chat. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to quickly go through some of the comments in the chat. So in the chat, there are links to the report. And I'm just scrolling down here. Yeah, and just also to flag that the presentation is being recorded and everyone who attended and registered will receive a link to the presentation within a week or so. Let me see. A comment from David Lilly, who had to leave, but just wanted to say how fabulous the research is and thank you. And then from Kathy Anderson, just saying she had to comment on how beautiful the inclusion of the drawings are, just really encapsulates the findings and narratives. And others, many people concurred with that. And also the point that the findings are relevant for people working from home, particularly those on the neurodivergent spectrum, but also for many others, including carers and those with visible and invisible disabilities. comments that Beatrice's story was really touching. And someone who loves I had to Google this, tabletop role-playing games. So now I've got a new acronym. Thank you to Jack for including that. And then someone else who had to leave, very interested, but amazing report, really affirming as a queer autistic person. Lots of loves, thank yous. Yeah, I think we can say that your report went down quite well. I'm just getting through these, and then I'll give people an opportunity to jump in if they wish. Thank you so much for this important research and beautiful resource, which our communities will no doubt benefit from. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Great presentation, thank you. Do you think it could be used as a self-advocacy tool with conversations with employers? So that was a question from Jack Gorman. Deborah, Meg, if you would like to respond to that one.
Yes, I think so. I mean, the reason we made the booklet in particular is so it's absolutely for the autistic community to use in any way they want to and would like to and would think is helpful for them. So I think, well, it obviously depends on assessing how the employer might greet such a thing, but I think because we've made it such a colourful and positive, you know, it's not full of a whole lot of complaining, it's very affirmative, then maybe because it is so positive, it could be a gentle way of letting other people know what some of people's challenges are, including employers. What do you think, Meg?
Yeah, I think so. So of the other case studies in there, a repeated theme is workplace accommodations. So, you know, two of them I mentioned, one was using hold and fill to decompress, as well as organizational software like Google Calendar and emails. Whereas another was experiencing burnout. And I think we mentioned in the report, had a lot of difficulty in getting access to their support needs once the COVID lockdowns were wound back and they had to go back to the office. So yeah, there's lots of examples in there of people who have benefited from workplace changes, and it talks about how it gives them energy and productivity. And also, I think there's a lot of space for promoting understanding. So there's one person's case study in there who I didn't mention, who is a rainbow, what we call a rainbow autistic. They're a sensory stimmer with visual input. They have a rainbow tattoo on their wrist to stim with because the bracelets about sensory issues. And that was really important and powerful for them to be able to have their sensory objects in the capacity of someone in a management position. So things they're thinking about gender and power because these colorful things were gendered. And I just want to point out, I know autistic people across the gender spectrum who are rainbow autistics and love colorful things, pink things, rainbow things. It doesn't matter what your gender is. But in particular, it is gendered as kind of a woman's thing in a corporate environment where masculinity kind of is leveled up. And this person did observe that people who were autistic but were masculine coded and in a cis male body kind of had less stigma attached to those practices, even if they were in a kind of more higher up role, a management type role. So I thought that was really interesting. So hopefully, yes, I hope so. And I hope that there'll be more resources coming across Australia that can be used by autistic people to just promote understanding. I think that's the first step. And then also asking for accommodations that often they're inconsequential. And they bring color and life to workplaces. I think it's great for workplaces to have diversity, color, joy, or even just freedom for everybody to be able to just have headphones on or to just move a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask, does anyone in the audience want to ask a question? Put your hand up, or there's a new question in the chat. So unless anyone online wants to ask a question, I'll just move to the chat. Okay. Thank you for the presentation, Deborah and Megan. I was wondering whether the findings you have seen are also dependent upon whether individuals are expert or self-diagnosed.
Both. So some had been professionally diagnosed and some of them were self-diagnosed. All of them were at an age where they had not been given easy access to the diagnostic process in Australia, particularly as late diagnosed, or people who realize later in life that they're autistic. So there's some people don't have access to diagnosis because of the sheer expense, and also not many people will offer that diagnosis. And also I think there's a lot of barriers, basically, in summary, of accessing diagnosis in general. We did have one or two who were diagnosed as children, and they were a little bit more recognizable under the system of diagnosis for autistic people at the time of their childhood. I think that was a significant thing. So it's mixed, self-identified, self-questioning, and also formally diagnosed.
Thank you. I actually have a question. I'm curious to go back to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you said you provided the artist with the transcripts. Is that how it worked? And then the artist created these beautiful illustrations. So I'm curious about the kind of analysis that came into that. So did that enhance your analysis, or was it additional to the analysis that you did? Did you identify different things that the artist didn't identify, or vice versa? How did that work?
Well, I think it was more that, oh, sorry, Meg.
There you go.
So we wanted to make the illustrations to graphically illustrate our findings. So Sarah definitely didn't identify anything that we hadn't already identified. I wouldn't say, Meg, right? But what she did is just illustrate them and present them in such a beautiful way that's very accessible in terms of communicating our findings in a different way from a very lengthy journal article or something. But well, put it this way, we certainly weren't surprised by the main things she picked out for each person, I wouldn't say, right, Meg?
No, I think Sarah and I were pretty much in sync with each other, in step with each other, and what we picked up on, because the information was communicated in a very rich and detailed way by all the participants. So one of the advantages of having autistic people collect and analyze this data at this level is kind of the ways that we communicate with each other. So there was a lot of what we call info dumping that happened, where I just let them tell me all this information that they wanted to give. And I love that information. It's like, very exciting and interesting to me. So I'm just happy to sit there and listen and learn. And as a result of that, the transcripts themselves were quite rich and dense compared to perhaps a neurotypical person's interview transcript, which I found really fascinating. And so in that way, I found that Sarah and I were really close to each other, because these people really, 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 really wanted people to understand. So they just gave us everything that they had. So there was no question marks about experiences or what a support was.
Great,
yeah.
Thank you. We do have one additional question that's just come in from Alice Anderson. Did the participants talk about the examples of adjustments being made in the workplace? What are some of the examples of best practice? What helped with the process?
You go,
okay,
Meg, you've got 1 minute.
Waiting.
You've got 1 minute.
Okay.
So don't
1 minute.
dump.
Oh my goodness, info dumping. Oh no. So basically, best practices in a nutshell, being able to control the lighting. So this might mean sitting in a different room or a meeting room if the lights are too bright. Headphones to either listen to music or cover out noise. Having sensory objects, so like a stress ball, a rubber band, a pencil. Some people were a bit more creative with, sensory bottles with glitter. Being able to have those things in the workplace, just take them out with them, was a very common accommodations that were made in addition to working from home. And those are some examples of those best practices. And what really helped with the process was having an understanding workplace that understood that this is what was needed. They're very minor accommodations, that it's not at the expense of professionalism or productivity. And as I said, it brings joy to everybody. So cultural change and having a really empathetic manager or HR in place that understood what these needs actually were, which is why we've tried to document them in this report as they're real. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Deborah, I would invite you to add, if you wish. We are at 4 p.m, so we can wrap up, but are there any final words you'd like to say before we do?
All I'd like to say is I'm sure Meg and I just are really loving the positive feedback we're getting. We've also had positive feedback from our participants that we shared the report with. So we're just super glad it all has worked out well, and that our plans for communicating our findings in such a positive way seems, and beautiful way, with Sarah's illustrations, seems to have hit the spot, which is great, isn't it, Meg?
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's really joyful.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the perfect topic or note to end on. So look, thank you very much. As you can see from all the comments from everybody who was here today, incredibly positive responses to your report. So well done. Thank you very much for sharing your research with us today.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.